Welcome to this enrichment video on the principles of macroeconomics. And today what we're going to study is applying our growth accounting framework, where we think about what are the causes of growth, to some communist countries, the USSR and China, and use what we learned from this historical study to think about, maybe make some predictions about what's in China's future. Will its growth continue, or is it likely to slow down? So as you remember from class, there were three proximate causes of growth: capital, labor, and A, or total factor productivity, which we basically think of as the level of technology in the country. And we had our growth accounting equation that relates them. It's percent change in Y, so that's the rate of growth, equals percent change in A, or technology, plus alpha, which is approximately 0.3 for most countries, times percent change in K, plus 1 minus alpha, so that would be approximately 0.7 in most countries, times percent change in the labor force, so the amount of man hours supplied. So each of these three factors is important, and we can actually collect data on Y, K, and L, and then see which factors were important. And then given that we have Y, K, and L, we can just solve for percent change in A, and then look at which was the main proximate cause of growth historically in different countries and different time periods. We saw some data in class on the handout for the United States, and you'll work on that on the problem set. So I'm going to focus on some other countries, that are not the U.S. to apply this framework. So as you probably learned in your history classes, there was a significant conflict between the United States, with its capitalist economy, and the Soviet Union, the USSR, and its communist economy. And this, in the 1950s, the leader of the USSR was Nikita Khrushchev, and he famously said something like, it was translated as, "We will bury you." Their economy was just going to surpass the United States in its success. And there was some evidence that he might have been right in the 50s, because the USSR really was growing faster. In its official statistics, it was growing incredibly rapidly, but even according to the CIA's estimates, based on its spies collecting data, the USSR was growing faster than the US. And a lot of people wondered, would this continue? So we can do this exercise now in retrospect, although they didn't really have the data for it then, and just do a growth accounting exercise and look at why was the USSR growing fast in the 50s, and then what was likely to happen in the future. And what we see is that in the 50s, there was a lot of growth in the capital stock and significant growth in technology. But in all the future years, the growth in technology really slowed down. The growth in the capital stock also slowed down, but it was still pretty significant all throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which turned out to be a time of overall stagnation in the USSR, just because even with this much capital accumulation, it's hard to make up for this very slow rate of technology accumulation. So we'll think about sort of the fundamental causes of this for a second. I think a lot of historians point to the fact that many German scientists were captured and sort of imprisoned, or became part of the USSR when Germany fell at the end of World War II. And they were all put to work making technology in the USSR and bringing over new technologies that Germany has invented to the USSR. And that probably explains this high rate of technological growth in the 50s. But after that, once these guys had sort of exhausted what they already knew, the USSR was technologically isolated. They didn't share ideas with American scientists and European scientists. So that might be the sort of fundamental cause of why they stagnated technologically. You really need to share ideas with the rest of the world community to keep being at the forefront of science and engineering. So looking at the USSR's experience, we'll shift to another communist country, the People's Republic of China. China was a true communist country, probably even more so than the USSR, up until 1978. And then they undertook a range of reforms that lasted until Deng Xiaoping's death. Deng Xiaoping, this guy here on the picture on the right, is probably the most influential person who lived in the 20th century, maybe even in history. And I say that because if you look at this graph on the left, you can see the enormous decline in poverty rates in China while he was, so this would be the first half of the graph, while he was alive and running and leading the Chinese economy. So if you ever want to ask people, like, what was the main cause of the decline of world poverty that we've seen over the past few years or past few decades, it's mostly been reforms in China that were undertaken under Deng Xiaoping. So he has a pretty decent claim to be one of the most important and influential people in world history. So let's do some growth accounting for China. We can look at the Deng Xiaoping years here in the first row, and then we'll look at the post-Deng years in the next row and see, does it parallel the Soviet experience, or is China doing things differently? If it's doing things similarly to the Soviet Union, we'd kind of expect eventually their growth is going to peter out the same way the Soviets did. If it's different, then maybe China can continue. It's on a different path. So when we look at the first row under the Deng Xiaoping years, it's pretty much just like the Soviet Union. Rapid accumulation of capital, so 10% increase per year, and rapid technological progress, 4% per year. The difference comes in this second row. They have even more rapid accumulation of technology, but more importantly, they continued to have rapid technological progress, even more rapid than they had in the Deng Xiaoping years over the next decade. And that's really quite a different experience from the Soviets. So we might want to ask, now that we know that the proximate difference was technological progress was faster in China, we can ask, why was that? What's the fundamental cause? So there's a few, main candidate explanations we saw in class. There's a set of geographical theories that emphasize, based on where you are, it's easier to trade with other countries. The disease burden is different. Your neighbors are different. And we see in China, geography does seem to be pretty important. The richer provinces of China are red here, a deeper shade of red, and as they get poorer, they become sort of a lighter shades, yellowish. And you can see almost all the rich provinces in China are right on the coast. And that makes it look like geography then is important, probably through the impact of trade, especially trade with the U.S. So geography might be important. Another candidate explanation is institutions. We saw that Deng Xiaoping sort of really changed a lot of institutions and policies in China, and that could be a definite proximate cause. Fundamental cause. A lot of people say China's not really a communist country anymore. While the Soviet Union was really a more or less true communist country throughout its lifespan, China today is more of a mix between communism and capitalism, so this institutional reforms could explain its greater success compared to the Soviet Union. And then finally, this sort of fits in with institutions, but it's a particularly important institution, the value placed on education and the systems in place to educate the people. And going back to Confucius' day, if you read the Analects, the first sentence in the Analects is, "To learn and then practice it time and again is a pleasure, is it not?" So there's a lot of emphasis on the importance of education throughout Chinese history. And you see this with sort of the bureaucracy. You have to be very educated to get a good job in the bureaucracy. There were standardized tests for who got into the bureaucracy. And maybe this sort of better institutions around education could be a key explanation of China's success relative to the USSR. So we really don't know, in general, the true fundamental causes of growth. It seems like a very complex issue, but it's a great one that you should continue your studies if you're interested in this topic. But for now, we'll just have to leave it with these three hypotheses that I think all are pretty reasonable, and you'll have to make up your own mind. Thanks for watching.